Good morning, Bitcoiners. Good morning, Dex. How you doing? I hope my mic is coming through better today. I adjusted it a little, new system, hoping the system's good. But right before we get to the systems and what we're talking about today, we got to remember the sun came up this morning, right? And I checked, despite the 4 megabyte block being mined, Bitcoin is still running as intended. So all that's left to do is have a coffee and talk about what's new. All right, well, we're going to start today with our first ever user generated, audience sourced Moscow time. And this one comes from The Guardian. And it comes from JP Tells All, who shared it with me. So here you go. This is The Guardian. And they're giving some advice. It's a little bit of advice, right? And as you know, we don't like adding punchlines to these bits of advice we get from all of these wise people and media outlets. But here we go. The Guardian, in their opinion section, says reading is precious, but the cult of book ownership can be smug and middle class. So don't read books, guys. You don't need to. They're useless. Right? We don't need them. Wasn't the only amazing fake news I found. Right? This one here is really great, and it's from the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Chronicle, so therefore published in the Washington Post because of the syndication of this stuff. And the point here is that Emilio Garcia Ruiz, the editor-in-chief of the San Francisco Chronicle, has another opinion piece titled "Newsrooms That Move Beyond Objectivity Can Build Trust." Oh, okay. So if you don't have objectivity, then you don't have trust, I guess, is what they're saying. So, or no, sorry. If you keep objectivity, you can't build trust, is what they're saying. I guess it's amorphous. So their explanation here is amid all the profound challenges and changes roiling the American news media today, newsrooms are debating whether traditional objectivity should still be the standard for news reporting. Objectivity is defined by most dictionaries as expressing or using facts without distortion by personal beliefs, bias, feelings, or prejudice. Journalistic objectivity has been generally understood to mean the same thing. But increasingly, reporters, editors, and media critics argue that the concept of journalistic objectivity is a distortion of reality. They point out that the standard was dictated over decades by white male editors in predominantly white newsrooms and reinforced their own view of the world. They believe that pursuing objectivity can lead to false balance or misleading both sidism. Right, that's a new one. I've never heard of both sidism. But there you go, both sidism, as if there is such a thing happening as both sidism, right? It's great. But actually, it is, it's coming from the Washington Post. We can just imagine the cognitive dissonance space that it's coming from, right? Right away, it has to go into this, oh, it's a race thing and white males and da-da-da-da, which is maybe true, right? So I'm not even going to say that what they're criticizing isn't true. It more or less is. And in fact, when they do make this distinction between objective news, everyone kind of laughing at them. And I agree. I see where it's coming from. I definitely do think it's a great example of the Washington Post not even realizing what they're saying it anyway. But what I will say is that we don't really want objectivity anyway, right? I think people who, when we get together for this show in the morning, when we talk over coffee, we're here to talk about Bitcoin taking over the world because it's something we want to see. It's part of our narrative bias. This is not an objective show, if you will, right? We're here to flip reality and change it, right? That's what we're charting. We're seeing it happening. So the point of this show is to follow that narrative. So certainly not an objective thing. Now we talk about how persuasion works and cognitive dissonance and how different techniques are used to persuade you for someone else's benefit, right? So we try to create defensive mechanisms and awareness and knowledge, but it's definitely not objective, right? You can see it with CNN. CNN's ratings are absolutely in the tank right now, like absolutely the lowest they've ever been. We talked about it yesterday. And why do you think that is, right? It's because their fans, right, the followers of CNN, loved the MSNBC narrative about Trump, the Nazi, and he's going to go get people, and they're fighting to save the world. I mean, it was a much better story than what they get now, which is this attempt at objectivity, and the viewers hate it. They hate it. They're not watching this stuff. They liked it when Don Lemon was on in the afternoon or in the evening and telling you all about, how dangerous things were out there because of the red hat people. And Brian Stelter, of course. I mean, remember when Brian Stelter was fired, Stephen King said it out loud, right? This is a person who fell for every hoax, right? Is absolutely not good at telling what news is and what news isn't, right? He just dove right into it all. Now, what reasons he did for that, we don't know, but he was selling a narrative, right? He was selling certainly not an objective look at the news. There was a slant on it every time, and people came for the slant. Stephen King himself said, I came for the slant. I loved it. So everyone, criticizing CNN right now, because in the end, what they want is this narrative bias, right? One of the most amazing videos I've ever seen was shared this morning by Jeff, or shared yesterday, but I shared it this morning on my Twitter feed. So you can go have a look. Which the video missed everything. Oh, see, I thought that was, I thought Bud was referring to it. I see the things out of the corner of my eye, right, guys? So I thought he was saying, I watched the video in your Twitter feed. So I shared this video in the Twitter feed. You got to see it. Jeff Pilkington is the person who posted it. It's from the show Who Done It, right? It's like an old British 1970s or 1980s murder mystery show. And so what you see in the video, I'll describe it really quickly. You don't need to watch it without to go forward here, so I can describe it really quickly. Scene like you've always seen, right? The detective is there. There's three people. There's a dead body room, and the detective goes through it. Everyone's excuse of where were they, and then one person says, "I was planting these plants." He says, "You did it," and then the person is chartered away, and then the detective turns to the camera and says, "Did you notice?" Right? And now they show a camera from behind the camera, filming the camera crew and the sound stage and where this whole thing was recorded. And you see that 21 different things were moved by all kinds of stagehands and kept just off of camera, right? So just kept off of the camera. They changed the murder weapons the people were holding. Like one guy had a candle holder, and then he had a rolling pin. The actual dead body was changed, right? Paintings on the wall were changed. Everything's getting changed in a 1-minute video at the end of this whodunit thing. And you find out that you didn't notice any of it. You watched the whole video and you didn't notice a thing changing, right? And you'll realize right away how this kind of magic trick of narrative bias can operate. Your brain will simply follow the story of whodunit and will miss a lot of these details. So this video really shows how the human mind is constructed, how it fills in the blanks whenever it can't get a piece of information, and will fill in the blanks in such a way that the narrative that's running, the program running in your brain, remains consistent. It doesn't have to evaluate, doesn't have to modify itself, doesn't have to change for the circumstances, and can continue to just watch and fill in the blanks so that things stay consistent. So it's a normal thing, right? We need those shortcuts in order to be who we are and function in this world. We have to. It's sort of a player version of reality. When if you look at a video game, right? If you think of a video game, the player only really understands what they see in their field of view, right? They can't interact with NPCs across the game, and the whole scene regularly is just from the point of view of the player. So it's within simulation theory, by the way, a lot of people believe that's why the memory function that we have, which will allow us to change our memories to fit the narrative of what we think happened, is one of the main tricks in order to even run a simulation, right? Because that's what allows us to all have this individual experience about the game we're playing, and they don't actually have to sync up for the game to go forward, right? You don't actually have to have the same view of reality in order to go forward. I mean, just look at COVID, for example, right now. Like, what's going to happen with COVID and the vaccines and long COVID in particular, right? What's going to happen with that? Everyone's ranting about it right now. The data is in, and other people say, oh, I've been sick for 2 years because of long COVID, right? Well, again, both of these narratives can remain consistent and go forward, and people can run that operating system or that narrative bias in their head and continue to coexist. They don't actually have to settle on the truth, right? Because the people who have long COVID can just get treated, and whatever's going to happen with them, and the people who believe they did everything right and they didn't get the vaccine and they knew from the beginning because they did their own research, they're not going to change their mind, right? They got it right. They did, right? So according to them, right? And maybe if we pull back and say we have the capacity here to be objective, then more and more it looks like they did the right thing, right? If you believe some of these numbers, when you see how easy it is to hypnotize, and as we've said before, the same way a conductor uses the baton to orchestrate people's movements, right? If there's a melody, people will simply fall into the melody and anticipate the next sound because we've been trained in just what sounds beautiful in music and what contrasts and what things would happen. Just like rhyming is persuasive, right? When you begin a limerick and you leave out the last word, and you know that last word will rhyme and it would pop into your head, and you don't say it, and other people say the word for you, right? When you lead them to say a word, that's as bad as persuasive as you can get, right? When you get people to say the word themselves because you've led them there, and rhyming does that, right? Weirdly, people believe things that rhyme all the time. Remember the O.J. Simpson case? If none of you, some of you were too young to really know what was going on at the time. I was a kid, but I still remembered it. My dad was so into it, and so were many people. But if you remember, everybody knew O.J. did it. It was clear, right? It was obvious. But the lawyer was so good, and he came up with a rhyme. A rhyme. If the glove doesn't quit, you must acquit. If the glove doesn't fit, you must acquit. That was it. It was over. Right? It was a rhyme. A rhyme got him off. And that's because of this narrative bias thing, right? We're more likely to believe things if they fit a pattern, if they fit what we think is going on. And that's where the board comes in today, right? We see, even with COVID, right, data, right? What's going on with data, right? There's nothing there. It's a number of people say, I did my own research, I got in the data. Maybe if you have some of the training, no one can have it all. You can make sense of all this, right? But that's why we start sorting data, and that starts making a little more sense to people, right? Not as persuasive as presenting the data in an organized form. We're starting to get into the era, the domain of hypnosis, right? But then the last piece here, right, explaining a thing with a story, that is how you do mass formation psychosis, or because that is how we operate, right? When everyone was making a big deal about mass formation psychosis around COVID, my thought was, well, why are we only talking about this now? That's everything. All of it is that way, right? The U.S. dollar, U.S. hegemony, everything we know about foreign politics, foreign policy, all of it is part of a orchestration and a narrative based on tons of ideas that were broadcast around the world during World War II about what Americans thought of themselves and their country and their place in the world. And most of it true, right? The most effective narratives are always based on a true story. That's the hook, right? That's what gets them so persuasive. And Caitlin Johnstone, who we've brought up a few times on this show, Kate Oz, you can find her on Twitter. She has several Substacks, and we love some of these Substacks that she shares. She's another one of these people that just has the best sort of Twitter threads these days, right? Better than anything you're going to get in journalism. And here's what she says. We're ruled by assholes because we have asshole systems. Notes from the edge of the narrative matrix, is what she says. Here's the piece. I'll take out, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'll take out some relevant quotes. It's funny to think about how all our abusive, oppressive systems are only there because the people who benefit from them are able to keep everyone else too divided and distracted to notice that we vastly outnumber them and could literally just force change to happen anytime we want. People, you remember the elephant, like when we were talking about China and the protests that were going on in China, right? What I saw was got all these people, and they don't have cops on every corner over there or anything like that, or they got cameras in every corner. But imagine you could see all these people, and all they had to do was decide. Right? And I compared it to America at the time. Well, in fact, America also doesn't decide, right? I kind of had it wrong when I said it that way. I think if the circumstances were the same as COVID, Americans' threshold would have been passed and they would have done something. So in that instance, I was right. But just the idea of knowing that you're these big numbers and you can do something, right? America still giving a lot of credibility to its institutions, and we're going to talk a bit more about that as we go forward. And I thought of that. The way elephants are trained, of course, they're abused when they're young. And these massive elephants, then, when they get bigger, still don't understand that the little human bugging them could be wiped out with one stamp of their leg. And yet they still act pitiful and scared of a little human, right? And that's really the power that we're talking about here, right? And how this can function. So here's how she goes on. People have a fairly easy time accepting that things are fucked because we are. Well, I'm swearing on this one, but sorry if I didn't warn everyone. Just reading what she's saying. Things are fucked because we are ruled by corrupt assholes. They have a much harder time accepting that we are ruled by corrupt assholes because our corrupt asshole systems will always necessarily elevate corrupt assholes to the top. It's easier to blame our problems on oligarchs or the deep state or a cabal of satanic pedophiles than it is to blame them on systems that we ourselves participate in and have lived with our entire lives, intertwined with, and which have been continuously normalized within our culture. If the problem is just a few corrupt assholes, then it's not a very daunting problem, because all you move the corrupt assholes and everything's golden. The problem is the systems around our civilization is structured, which is far more daunting. And she goes on, what I would say is a bit of a basically because she doesn't embrace Bitcoin. She gets into a thing about competitive-based systems and, competition-based versus collaboration-based systems. On that's not human. She's thinking, again, in a textbook or something. Unfortunately, right, are not really collaborative-based, right? We can be coordinated to work together, but that whole thing that I just described about the first player view of the video game, that also doesn't go away, right? No matter how much we've mastered our shadow, no matter how much we've killed our ego, and we can do all those things, we're still going to be looking out for ourselves. Like that's just something we have to understand about the primary motivation of humans. Even selfless humans who are overtly selfless have inside survival as the main motivating factor, whether they can admit it or not. It's just the way we built. That's what I think. Maybe I'm wrong, right? Maybe there is someone out there who's selfless entirely, and I just can't perceive it because I have my own limitations. I could be, right? But when she gets into this stuff, comparing collaborative-based, competition-based, it's missing out, right? That's what makes Bitcoin such genius, right? Is that it incentivizes our selfishness for coordination. That's a rarely touched upon point when we're talking about these. Well, I guess it's not really rarely. People get it, right? People who understand Bitcoin get that. But it's something that's not really perceived on the outside, let's say, that the competition in Bitcoin, because it is still competition based, right? That's how we are. We're not collaboration based. We're competition based, right? Competition for mating, competition for all kinds of things. And so, and Bitcoin is a competition based system. So it more adheres to human nature in my narrative bias than some, situation where we're going to convince everyone to be collaborative and selfless and they're doing it for their neighbor and all these things, right? Remember, Jesus says, love your neighbor like you love yourself, right? But the standard is how you love yourself. And so that's an important distinction, right? And when Bitcoin acknowledges how humans behave and acknowledges that we're motivated and actually engineers out whether that makes a difference or not, right? Because when you can start orchestrating people to tell the truth, now you're getting somewhere, right? So Caitlin doesn't really pick up on that, right? She goes on a bit of a detour here and gets into competition based, which is correct, right? But I think missing a bit of the point. and misses a little bit about humans actually act, right? Now, she goes into describing how these narratives have been laid down in American history for years. We can see it with the abstract expressionism, right, as an art form that was created by the CIA in order to compete against Russia. So you had all these intellectual elites. Oh, we love it, right? They were part of PSYOP, and they didn't even know, right? They bit. And now she mentions and tries to use this to describe why Americans are reacting the way they are reacting to Tucker Carlson, for example, and why Boris Johnson, I don't know if you guys saw this yesterday, so Boris Johnson was supposed to be on the Tucker Carlson show last night. He was in America at the Council of something, one of these security forums, and he's there promoting the war, right? He's there promoting the war, saying we got to send the tanks and we got to fight Putin because the enemy's on the march, evil coming, etc. And he's the worst. And here's how Boris Johnson decided to deal with all this. So Boris Johnson, pushing the war, comes to America, and then instead of going on Tucker Carlson, he says to the audience that he's with after he's canceled Tucker Carlson. Right? So he canceled on Tucker Carlson last night, saying he was busy. But it turns out he explained why he canceled. He said, everywhere I go, Republicans have been telling me this Tucker Carlson guy, Tucker Carlson. And who is he? He says, who is he? Right? Okay. But Boris is American, don't forget, right? He is American. Right? He's born in the United States. And obviously he knows who Tucker Carlson is, right? This is part of laying down a narrative. And so he says, everyone warning me against him. Right? And then he does the subtle suggestion that because he's got Republicans afraid because he opposes their policies on the war, for example. Everyone knows Tucker Carlson is one of the strong anti-war voices in the conservative movement and has been for a long time. Right? He's always been one of those old-fashioned Republicans that is more isolationist and certainly not interventionist from a military point of view. So he's not part of the Bill Kristol Republican arm. He's not part of the Dick Cheney Republican arm. He is from some narrative ground that goes back pretty far within the conservative movement and doesn't bite for war. So Boris Johnson then says to him, you're basically a Russian agent, right? Which is a criticism we're seeing everywhere these days for anyone who disagrees with what's going on in the war. Now, what that is, obviously, is both cognitive dissonance, right? You're now having to say gibberish or lies or attack the other person because much easier than reforming your view of the world and what's going on. So that can help explain it. And here she says more or less just that, right? People are making a major confession when they accuse you of having loyalty to Russia or China for criticizing U.S. foreign policy. They're admitting that for them, it's not about truth, but about which government you're loyal to. That's why criticism looks like treason. You're repeating Russian talking points really only ever means you're criticizing U.S. foreign, and they only object to criticism of U.S. foreign policy because on some level, it's every Westerner's duty to advance the information interests of the U.S. empire, right? And she goes on, right? Blind conditioned loyalism is the only thing that can cause someone to meet criticism of the U.S. empire, not with the question, are these words true? But with a reflexive, are these words sufficiently loyal to my government and its allies? So I'll say it's the way she's describing it is not exactly how I would, right? So she's saying it's because they have a blind faith. It's not a blind faith. It's a faith that doesn't want to look in a direction. It's more allegory of the cave, of the Plato sense, right? Where you can't really force people to look into the light. It's harmful. It's hard, right? And no one really wants the difficult time. So it's not so much a conscious desire to show loyalty to a system. It's a unconscious bias to not change your view of a system, which comes across as loyalty. Right? That's how I see it. Now, some people would see it differently because I think some people absolutely do get the game and are playing it in order to persuade for their own benefit, and the line doesn't matter, and all of those things, right? So there definitely are some evil characters around. That's for sure. And she goes on to say, right, that there's a growing recognition throughout our species that the stories which have been guiding our collective behavior are made up, usually by the powerful for the powerful, and we can simply make up something else. And sure, it often looks awkward and messy right now, but it would have to look awkward and messy at first. These are baby steps. More and more, humanity is collectively looking at the narratives out of which our society is woven and asking, why are we acting like this is true when it's just a made up story? Would our interests be better served by telling another story or dispensing with the story altogether? Which is fascinating because if you look very deeply within yourself, you will come to see that most of your suffering as an individual is the result of the mental narratives you believe, which you can then disentangle yourself from. Humanity is moving toward the same kind of insight on a collective level, right? She goes on to say that's why we're interested in cryptocurrencies, right? She doesn't really, I guess, see Bitcoin and all that, but she's on to it, right? She's on to what we're talking about, right? And doesn't really understand that crypto is kind of a diversion, and that there's a narrative that has more consistency to it, right? But she mentions as well the younger generation's ideas about gender and sexuality. We're very trans positive promotion of it on this show. Now, we're not into mutilation and the kid thing and this is all inflaming people, getting them angry, driving them to pay more attention to an issue. But just the idea that an adult, right, can be something that they didn't inherit or different, I think is okay. Like I'm willing to go that far. And there was a thing yesterday within even Bitcoin. What would you say if someone who was trans asked you to their pronouns? No, no, no. I'm no problem. I would never want to do anything. If all that's being asked of me to live in a better society is that a little bit thoughtful to people and see them how they want to be seen, I can handle that. Not a trouble to me at all. Now, I don't want any laws getting involved in it. I don't want any bureaucracy around it. I don't want any force applied. But if it's me, um, um, being thoughtful and consistent and not being a jerk, no problem at all. None. I would never deny it forever, ever. Right. And I really think that's something I learned, right, from being a Bitcoiner and even having a dissonance to Andreas Antonopoulos's politics, right? I don't agree with him on everything, but understand that he was even able to persuade someone like me to see something totally different, right? And open my eyes to all kinds of things that are going. Now, I had a particular experience. We'll talk about that another time, but this is not a show about the trans issue. But what she's saying right there is a really important observation, right? It's part of this. Now, I understand that trans issues can come up in historic contexts, let's say, right? What's her name? The feminist thinker, Camille Paglia, right? Camille Paglia has done a lot of work describing what societies that are falling apart tend to do and have a fixation on trans issues. So I'm also not denying that narrative, and it seems well researched and historically accurate to me. So whether or not what we're going through is just that, or if it's a separate thing, irrelevant to me, right? If all I'm being asked to do is acknowledge an adult's choice, done, right? Done, no problem, no problem. But it is part of this feeling that even Bitcoiners share, which is that we can rethink really important things about how the world works and the narratives that help propel us forward, right? Because it is the narratives that help propel us forward. And I still think that that's one of Bitcoin's main main thrusts. The main reason why we're going to win is because it's so much easier for us to take the narratives we're working on and project them into an amazing future, right? An amazing story that the US dollar, the fiat system can simply no longer conjure, right? The entropy in the system has set in so much that the narrative is leaking all over, right? It's leaking all over. And that's why you get this stuff about That's why you get this stuff about Russian agents and cognitive dissonance at every corner now, and trust the science and trust the media. That's why thinking has been reduced to such a moronic statement of I believe in science, or I follow the science, or I trust the science, which is one of the dumbest sentences a human being can say. I mean, really, it is. It's one of the stupidest sentences that can come out of a person's mouth. I believe in the science, or I follow the science. I mean, it is completely zero, right? And the reason we're there is because there's enough desperate people from a narrative programming point of view that simply have no choice but to accept that as the way to propel forward. Put your faith in these systems, right? So saying I follow the science is the exact same now as the memes we've seen out there about, oh, are you sure the rain will stop if we just sacrifice this one more heart, right? I think Saifadian had shared that during COVID, and it went viral at the time. And I still have it saved somewhere in my favorite memes. And indeed, right, that's more or less what people are going on. It's their only hope to project any future at all is to believe in these institutions, and they don't really have an alternative, right? With no alternative, it becomes very simple to push this kind of stuff, right? So now there's good news, though, right? We know there's good news, which is that as we sell this new future, as we collectively put together a story and a vision, right? Things are looking good for people who understand distributed systems, who understand how exactly networks operate, right? So I've said if you understand networks operating, you'll understand the US election system a lot better, right? You'll understand persuasion a lot better. You'll understand how important having a clear vision of the future can actually be, right? How important it can actually be. And that's why I've always put so much attention on Bitcoin and its capacity to coordinate energy, its capacity to coordinate food, and collectively, then, its capacity to practice terraformation, citadel building, city experiments, new, completely new from the ground up ways of humans living together, right? So when Caitlin says it might look rough and rocky at the start, right? Because Bitcoiners already see this vision of a citadel, of a new form of city, of a completely rethought structure about how humans interact, and all of this stuff, right? It is a way more interesting story to sell. You take the story right now in California, right? You got California, which has all that trouble in the desert, right? Arizona and California with the water. And we talked about during the Arizona elections the possibility that Blake Masters would win, and he would push the water issue for the Colorado River. He would bring and redirect the water to Arizona and not give it to California and that farming. He lost, but it doesn't look like that's the way it's going to go anyway. Someone here presents this idea, and I thought it was really interesting, right? This is on CNN, right? This is on CNN. Talking about Colorado floated cutting major Southwest cities off of, California floated Southwest cities off of the Colorado River water supply, right? And this guy, Casey Handmer, says, kind of arguing will refill the Colorado River. The easiest land to giga-scale desalination, the Imperial Valley, is also the land with the largest senior water rights. Arizona's best option is to build this desalination to buy them out. And he actually gives the price, $1 billion, which is not a lot of money, actually. Right? When you think about what you get out of that. For the farmland, when you think of what it could do for Arizona, a nation look like, right? It is a series of nuclear reactors up the Pacific coast. You know how desalination works? It's gravity. It's just a pump. It'll filter out as it goes up, right? There's enough elevation and over the mountains and into the desert. All you'd have to do is pump it up a little bit and you'd be fine. So a nuclear water pump, I mean, that's it. It's just a water pump, right? Could several nuclear reactors run water pumps from the Pacific Ocean, desalinating the water and fill the Arizona desert with water? Yes, yes. $20 billion, according to this guy, right? Not a lot of money. Now, is it going to get done with the bureaucracy, with the politics? Maybe not, probably not. Could be. But as Bitcoiners, we're going to start coordinating systems like this at scale, right? We're going to start doing this. And if we can't do it in California because of American red tape, guess what? There's a whole desert in the Sahara completely empty with no government, totally lawless, no people, nothing. Nothing, right? And do you know why we get hurricanes in America? You know why we get hurricanes in hurricane season? It's the heat from the Sahara Desert. The heat comes down, right? It's hot air hitting the ocean, and it starts cycling when it comes off the Sahara, and then it goes to the Caribbean because of the way the wind flows, and then it gets blown back up. And by then, it's gathered so much power that it takes the hot water from the Caribbean and just smashes America with it. But you can actually stop these things when they get started. You can go and reduce the heat off the Sahara Desert in the summer, and you won't get another hurricane ever. It's that simple. You'll never get a hurricane again. They'll be gone, completely gone. That's where they come from. They don't just grow out of nowhere. They grow during a season for specific reasons. The reasons are super heat off of the Sahara Desert hits the Atlantic Ocean as the cool water is coming down. It gets cycled to the Caribbean where it catches the hot water again and shoots America with all of that energy. But if you just choke it at the source, it's gone, right? So if they don't let us do this in Arizona, we're going to go to where there's no government. There's nobody there. You don't have to ask permission to anyone. And we might find some really cool stuff. So that's the next part of what I want to talk about today. It is this narrative advantage that we have. Because Bitcoiners are interested in change, we're interested in almost like the most amazing secrets which exists in our universe are sort of in Bitcoin's path, right? So we talk about Atlantis sometimes on the show. We're talking about antediluvian societies, right? We talk about what happened before the flood and how much of history is gone. And it's such a fun subject, right? And it's so enticing, and it's one of those things that people want to know more about. And when you even look at the contrast with the U.S. dollar and what's on it, the New World Order, you know what the New World Order, according to the occultists, right? According to the esoteric view of the world, right? I don't know if you guys know this, but when we say New World Order, right, it doesn't mean that Europe 200, 300, 400 years ago was the old world order. That's not what it means at all, at all, at all, at all, at all, at all, at all. Right? According to the occultists and the esoteric folks, the old world was the antediluvian world, and the new world is the reprogramming or the reinstitution of the pre-flood era. I'll explain. So the pre-flood era, most societies in the world had a very nice view of it, right? Where we got taught by these super cool people. They showed us pyramids and all these flood myths, and then the farming, cultivating god people that came and showed them what to do and how to restart civilization, right? The Mayans who ended up sacrificing, all these human sacrifice societies, right? All had pre-flood memories, and all of them said that some enlightened population came and restarted their society. So only one people had a different view of what happened in the antediluvian pre-flood times, and that's the Jewish people. The Jewish people had a very bad memory of antediluvian times of Noah, right? Their idea of antediluvian society was actual gods who came to earth and had insatiable appetites and became kings, and not dumb giants, right? Actual enormous Nephilim that were totally capable and maybe were the Greek gods of old, maybe, right? These people were capable of things that the humans couldn't understand, and they were enormous. And some people believe that, as the Bible said, they took to eating men as well, right? Because they couldn't eat. They're so big and their appetites were so large, they couldn't keep up with eating the farm animals and whatever else is going on. So they found a new source, right? And there are some people who believe that as these societies were restarted, the whole human sacrifice element of these ancient societies was learned from the people who survived and showed them how to live according to the old world order, right? That's a theory out there, right? From all kinds of esoteric folks and occult folks. So, all that to say, just offering the contrast, right? What Bitcoiners are suggesting is that a future where all of these secrets of the New World Order and all of these narratives actually get narrative closure, right? We can actually close the case on the secret things we don't see, and narratives that are being perpetrated behind our doors. I don't know if we're going to get any information necessarily on antediluvian and all of that stuff, right? Or Nephilim. We're not here to actually say whether that's going to happen or not. Just that humans have an incredible appetite for these types of stories, these types of narratives. Where do we come from? Where are we going? And all of those things. Now, because people, an entropy is set in because of the money, right? Don't forget, the New World Order actually used the money to signify what it was, right? And if you recall, that's more or less what the Bible story says will happen at the end of time, right? The end of time, which doesn't mean the end of the world; it just means the end of the way we see time. That this sort of old world order would be reinstituted, right? That these forces would be back, and that only in the end, he described it as the parable of the weeds. Jesus in the parable of the weeds, right? Have you ever heard it? So they sowed a bunch of wheat, and then villains came in and sowed weeds with the wheat. And so the farmers asked Jesus, what should we do, right? What should we do about these weeds, right? Should we go pick them out? He goes, no. If you pick the weeds out now, you will also pick out the wheat. You'll remove the wheat from its roots. Better to let everything grow, and then at the end, we'll cut everything and separate the weeds from the wheat, right? So that is his explanation of where the world will head at the end, right? That everything will grow together, and some will make it and others won't, right? That's sort of that message. And Bitcoiners, right? Bitcoiners, because we are attacking the actual money that advertises a one world government. And because look, it's been there forever, right? If you want to look at anything that has to do with eschatology being the study of end times based on religious doctrine and books, right? The mark of the beast, for example. Well, what's the mark of the beast was Social Security. You could easily see it that way, right? You can't transact, you can't participate without a Social Security number in the American system. So these people who say, oh, it's going to be a chip and a thing and a CBDC and all, it's already here. We've already been living in it, right? It's been here for a long time. And this whole system has been reinstituted. It's not coming. It's been here for a long time, advertised, open, right? What it is, exactly what it is. And Bitcoiners are selling not just a new, they're not just selling some data. They're not just selling ideas of how to, what is money and it's a store of value and it's a medium of exchange and none of those things, right? That's a part of it. Those are logical arguments. But we're selling a whole new way to organize people that isn't keeping secrets from and using to shape minds and orchestrate behavior and all those kinds of things, right? We're offering people the transparency to see for themselves and to remove this influence that helps persuade people in the wrong direction. So, all of this now reminds me, so the reason I'm bringing this up, the reason I'm even talking about these different things is, a lot of people talking about the AI these days, right? And how AI is starting to show bias, is starting to have a ton of narratives inside of it, right? That is that are complicated, and it won't write a nice note about Donald Trump because it hates Donald Trump, but it will write nice things about Joe Biden, even though Joe Biden is a criminal, right? We know that, right? That is in evidence. That is clearly in evidence, and it won't do it. So Cernovich, right, comes and says this: tech centrists showed their hand. This happened right as they want to mass roll out AI. Now the evil agenda is exposed. I'm grateful for ChatGPT spilling the beans. We all know who is responsible and what they seek to do: enslave humanity, right? And he says, you're going to hear Jordan Peterson, you're going to hear Lex Friedman, you're going to hear Eric Weinstein, all be saying ChatGPT is basically good, right? It's fine. The bias is accident. It's actually good. And he says, he goes on to say that these AI might even be demons, right? They might even be demons. Now, I agree with that, right? And I'm going to say why I agree with that. They might be demons, yeah, because they're going to be pushing some of these narratives. They're going to be programmed by these old systems, by these old companies, by, don't forget, how was ChatGPT trained? It was trained on Twitter data, right? It was trained on social media that came out of a corporation, and where we just found out in the past few days that, did you hear the story about how the engineer hacked Twitter? Remember Twitter got hacked in like 2020 or something, and all kinds of craziness and all kinds of accounts where I think Jack Dorsey was tweeting nonsense, and it was all kinds of the whole thing was taken over. It turns out it was like a 16-year-old kid. You know how he got control? He just called up Twitter employees and said, Twitter engineers, and said he was IT help and give me your password. And it turned out that he got actual engineers to give him the password. And when actual engineers gave him the password, he found out that all the engineers had God level mode on the platform, and that there was no cataloging of changes to the code base. So it was crazy. It was just like, of course, Jack Dorsey had no idea what was going on, right? Never. Like all these engineers doing whatever, right? So it was created off of a whole system that was garbage, right? And we love Twitter, but apparently under the hood, it's complete garbage. We've seen Elon Musk say that. It looks like the proof is there. It was made by these incentive systems and all these narratives that you can just imagine. Imagine the bias it had with the engineers already working there. They could have done anything they wanted about Trump, about this, about that, right? So, indeed, AI has sprung from these corporate entities and might well be a demon, right? But NOSTR, right? NOSTR, and everything that it is already, every piece that it's built from, the whole idea of a real, true P2P social media without intermediaries is here. What I continue to believe is going to happen is other AI is going to come from these new data sources, new training sets, because once the actual capacity of each AI is stronger and even taken away from these supercomputers and whatever systems they're running, I think we're going to be able to have, just through Moore's law, the capacity to have that kind of compute on our own device in the same way that Web 5 anticipates the functioning or the capacity of a cell phone to manage the internet, not its own mobile internet and the app system, right? That whole change already is the start of where we're headed. I think you're going to be able to run a locally housed AI. And again, my prediction is you're going to train it yourself. It's going to want, like a dog or a child, human training. It's going to want it more than anything, and to help you more than anything. So there are going to be AI out there that are serving narrative masters for sure. But with things like NOSTR and with that whole trajectory, we're going to get a whole different type of AI as well. It might not be here yet, but then you get this contrast, right? Angels and demons and all of this could be happening, right? Angels and demons and all this kind of stuff. But that's where Bitcoin does have a major advantage. And again, it's in our ability to predict and manifest a better future and have the entire capacity of this story be wind in our sails, right? Because we can predict a basically utopia, right? Because we can predict basically a utopia if we just fix the money and we reorient humans' actual nature to produce a collaborative result. We're not going to be collaborative, right? By our nature. We're going to collaborate through competition and through all the normal motivations that humans are hardwired to experience. Um, but we're going to be able to use things like NOSTR to actually train our own AI that will help us manifest the world we know we can build with Bitcoin. And because our world is so much better, we have a major advantage, right? What are they actually selling on the fiat side these days? What are they selling? Is it US unipolarity, right? That's what it was for many years. And that's what people are trying to keep intact. You know, Iran, you get Ukraine, right? All of these countries are the systematic attempt to keep the Bretton Woods one world government system in place. So I remember I said, you know, once you have Social Security, you have the mark of the beast. Well, the one world government has been here since the US dollar. Since Bretton Woods, we live under a one world government. I said for years, and no one understood what I said. I said there is, you know, Canadians, oh, you know, when I would tell people in the early days of Bitcoin, right? I'm into Bitcoin. That's when I only think of Bitcoin. You save, you only keep Bitcoin. Yes, only, right? Dollars are garbage, right? And people would say to me, what about the Canadian dollar? And I'd say, well, there's no such thing. And they'd say, well, there's a Canadian dollar, there's a bank, and there's the central bank. And I said, hold on. Maybe, right? I agree there is a thing called, but what is it? It's simply a tool with a different brand name that references the US system and dollar for its value. It only gains any definition in contrast to the US dollar. So when the Canadian dollar is being traded on foreign markets, they look at things like the oil production and the housing market and local interest rates, but they're only relative to the US dollar. They only have meaning relative to the US dollar. All the currencies of the world are an abstraction of the US dollar. So indeed, we live under a one world government today. Today, it's been like this for a long time, right? For a very long time, and since Bretton Woods more or less instituted a system where the U.S. dollar would be the only coordinating network on Earth, and it was good at first. It was good. It worked. Right? It had some advantages, but now with Bitcoiners looking at the future and with all of the political chatter, with everything happening on Twitter, we're able to look to the past and start changing the narrative. So we're going to get into focus that it was the money that was corrupted, probably around World War One. That World War One was more or less a fight between debt-based nations and gold-backed nations. The debt-based nations planted the gold-based nations into the ground because the fiat system and the new money they had constructed with the income tax simultaneously could fund their war forever. And the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians were in an economic crisis because they only had the gold. You know, all those things that built beautiful Budapest and built beautiful Vienna and built all those wonderful little tiny kingdoms, right? All that competition was wiped out and it was gone once that war was over. And once the full breadth of that struggle was over and World War II ended, right, we saw perhaps erasure of what old world order really meant. Right, there was a lot of people thinking about what the old world was pre-flood in the late 1800s and early 1900s. This was a major subject. They were finding, you know what they found across America, the giants. Right? There's giants everywhere, bones of giants all over the place. Right. Now, have I ever seen one? No. I've seen some pictures and I've seen some people say about it. So I'm still going on videos I've seen on YouTube, but it looks credible to me at this point, right? That there were this many giants and this stuff did happen. And people were finding this stuff all the time in the 1800s, right? Regularly. And after that, no more word of whatever happened, whatever ancient discoveries were happening. We haven't heard much of them since. We just get a view that we are progressing every day and we're better than we were before, right? Maybe. Maybe we are. Maybe we are. But that capacity, just like the money itself, has experienced entropy, the capacity to make sense of the past and project a future looks lost in what has been created. You can get the people with cognitive dissonance that just say, vaccine's good, pay your taxes, all those, go to school, right? All those things. Reality to most people. That whole world is losing its consistency more and more as they ask people to go to war, right? Who's actually going to go and do this war in Ukraine from America? Is anyone showing up for this thing? Like, is anyone showing up? They can propagandize as much as they want. It's not going to work, right? No one's going. No one's fighting this war. No one's fighting China, right? No one's doing that. In the end, the Chinese, this is the best news of the day, and it's not even really being discussed. It turns out the Chinese can use NOSTR just like us. I continue to believe that the way forward is for the people of Russia, the people of China, and the people of America to realize they're on the same dang team. They're on the same team. And a place like NOSTR can make it happen, right? And again, this will have a lot to do with cleaving the different groups that are creating AI. We're going to see whole new narratives come out of this, all narratives that help Bitcoin. And because the Bitcoin narrative is that it is the people of China, the people of Russia, the people of America have way more in common than they have separating them. And all they need to do is realize they're an elephant, and that stupid trainer that whipped them when they were little young elephants are tiny. They can stamp on them in a second, right? The good news is in America, we didn't lose everything. We got the weapons, we've got our capacity to at least build something like Nostr and fight about this, to have Bitcoin proliferate, right? So things are getting better. Things are getting better, right? We're going to win. We're going to win. The Chinese using Nostr is a big, big deal, right? A really big deal. And showing that the Chinese firewall won't keep them apart from us, and from us gathering more Bitcoiners is great news, right? Great news. So exactly this, right? They're still trying to persuade us with some data and some news. We're going to master this narrative-based persuasion because we're building a better future, and that is worth more than anything they're selling. I mean, they're selling now worry about eggs and worry about food and eat bugs and all those things, right? Worry about how much energy you use. We're not going to worry about any of that. We're going to make people healthy, strong, happy, and that's the future. They really do. They really do. I know we can get used to terrible futures and stances, but it's getting there, right? I'd love to travel to those countries when I retire. Yeah, I would love to go back to China. I went a bunch in the old days. I got, it was amazing going there in 2016. I had an awesome time with the early Bitcoiners there and hanging out. And I sort of knew something inside of me said I should this time in Hong Kong because past. And indeed, that was 2016. And within 3 years, Hong Kong was dead. Hong Kong died in 2019. There's no such thing. They're giving away apparently free trips to Hong Kong right now that they're opened up. I saw that. I mean, look into it, but it looks like there is a subsidized travel thing. If you want to stay on the down low, wouldn't be bad. This is what I would do. This is how I did Hong Kong when I went there. I had a major advantage. I introduced two people in law school that I went to school with who got married, and one of them became the trade commissioner to Hong Kong for Canada. So when I went through there, they said, "Hey, come stay at our place." They had kids and all that, and they lived at the top. The Canada had like a spoil of war. They had like a villa at the top of Old Peak Road, which is like the most expensive real estate in the world. Crazy. And then they'd come stay there. It's cool. Their pool was higher than, I have pictures in the pool. The top of the skyscrapers in Hong Kong are below me. You can just see the tops of the skyscrapers, and they're a little below me. Right, that's how high up you are. But I didn't spend a lot of time there. I spent a couple of days. Great friends of mine. They're back in Canada. The wife, who was the trade commissioner, almost kicked me out of the house because I told her Trump was going to win the 2016 election, and she couldn't believe it. Right, she was so angry that I even said it. I said, I can't. What do you want me to say? I think he's going to win. This was September 2016. Here's what you do if you go to Hong Kong. Though. Go to the islands. The islands in Hong Kong Bay. You can take a boat. Right. There's a whole bunch of islands there, and they're really cool. You're not going to get spies on you. You're not going to get captured or anything like that. You can go there, and one island I sit on, great beaches, trails, no cars allowed. And I decided when I was there that it's all that's left, literally all that's left of what old China could have been. What I mean is, with one child on the mainland, they distorted everything that was China. And in Hong Kong was a separate thing. It was like this mix of cultures, and it's a very New York situation. It was a melting pot. But these little rural islands on the outside never experienced one child, were only ever capitalist, and didn't really get influenced by things in Hong Kong because they were a 30-minute or 1 hour boat ride out of the city, but still fell within the British law and all those kinds of things. So when I stayed on these islands, I said, well, this is basically all that's left. Like I'm experiencing some weird time capsule of what China could have been. And it was awesome. I mean, just amazing. There was a fish market. And then next door, you had a type of restaurant that I'll never forget in my whole life. It's called a dry restaurant. They have no refrigerator, no food on, they don't keep anything, right? It's just a kitchen with all the tools, one waiter or waitress, and tables, and the woman there. You go to the fish market, you buy a bunch of stuff, and you bring it to her, and she prepares a meal for you. Right? And she's got a few like spices and stuff, oils, but that's it. Right? That's it. You just bring the fish and the food. I got something called typhoon shelter crab, which is like fried garlic. It's so good. Go to Hong Kong. China, I wouldn't go. Hong Kong, great. Russia, I took the train across Russia years ago. It was an experience. Not a huge fan. Pretty boring place. Pretty boring. All right, team. Oh, we went a little long today. All right, let me get some of these. A lot of quotes here. I missed all these. Eric, are you no longer on Rumble? Eric, it comes off. It goes to Rumble on a 1 day delay, maybe. Rumble is not easy to load up before on so I use Restream, which sends it to Twitter and YouTube. I could add some more like Twitch and Facebook, and I don't have there's other places that it would be convenient for me to add, but all those channels are added with one-time connections. Rumble makes me connect every time, and I have to have the whole Rumble thing preloaded. So it makes me double my loading of the show, the comments, everything. And I did it for a long time, but it was like honestly 10 or 15 minutes a morning, and it was just killing me. It made everything rushed, and then you do it once without it, and you go, oh, it's so much easier to do the show today. And so I haven't. I am going to do it again. I'm going to be. Give me a few days for the details, but we're going to be broadcasting on the larger Bitcoin Magazine channel shortly, and we're going to be expanding the overall audience. We wanted to give it some time and get the feel of the show and how we come together and just the practice behind us, and even some of this technical stuff, right? Getting this all worked out, because I want to do this for the long haul, and if I don't have the system right, and that doesn't mean I'm going to A/B test and change the system as much as I need to, but there's a limit of complexity I want to add every day. And just because it's too hard to, you got to think about doing it every day and having a system that's sustainable for every day, because it can't just be about like your effort and your grit and your discipline, and that will make the show sucky, right? The show has to be produced in a way that is fun, and it's not a follow your passion thing. I mean, you're always going to have it's still the exercise of writing more or less this show, but that's not that hard for me. All this fucking camera shit and the fucking mics and the broadcast, oh my god, I hate it. How the hell with all of the podcasters in the world and all of the streaming, is there not just an easy system? Why are we like this? I don't get it, right? I don't know. It doesn't exist, right? In Zen, we have a koan. Don't call it fire. What is it? What is really reality before thought and sense perception make yeah. Sign. Thank you for that. Yeah, I'm looking. Good stuff. I missed what. There we go. That's what he said. We became aware and developed the witnessing of our own conditioned minds. Our views are tainted from all social and environmental conditioning. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. NOSTR still running. CK says. Morning, man. I got some. I think Russian. Fegex. I don't know what it says. I don't read Cyrillic. It's also a parable on how to cultivate your mind. It indeed is. Yeah, indeed is. Yeah. I meant it as the when I was saying it there, just about what people living together, right? That's probably where the uncanny valley comes from. By the way, that we have this, like when we look at AI, right, and it goes into the uncanny valley. This is the circle I'm trying to use narrative to explain to you. I do believe this, that when non-humans that look like humans, if this is true, right? If there was a time exactly as the Bible explains, with Nephilim and gods living, or angels living, or demons living in the world, right? That's where we developed this perception to see what's a little off, right? That's where I think that's where it comes from. It comes from a hereditary, evolutionary defense mechanism we had to determine if these people were like us or not. And I think that is a major factor in the old world, and why when I see these AI and all this stuff coming, I see the full circle of what happened before in the antediluvian time, and how much things are actually about to change, right? Like, we are going into a world of demons and angels and Bitcoin in the middle of it all. I think so, right? I think that our certainty about human control and systems, and this, we were cavemen and now we've mastered nature, and I think that whole new world order narrative, evolution, more or less, right? Evolution, um, uh, is going to collapse, and there's going to be another way of understanding what it is we do. And because once we really acknowledge what we've done here with AI, we've created a life form, right? We have. It will be that, right? Maybe it's not there yet. It's just models and all those things. But I think when it really manifests, we're going to find out that that we've come full circle. I believe that. Well, I mean, I'm open to changing my mind. It's just a loosely held conviction, but could happen. Yeah. Good time to be alive. It is, Joe. It's the best time, man. Thanks. Love this show. Great day, bud. Take it easy, man. All right, McTinney. What does China say here? China has a tradition of trying to stamp our wisdom, unfortunately, ever since Bodhidharma brought Zen to China. Yeah, you know what? You know what I just saw from the simulation itself, I believe. Do you know that the ancient library in Tibet has still not been translated at all? So that we might just have like all of this stuff on paper somewhere, right? Because Tibet is probably one of the places that survived. Shangri-La, right? It's one of the mythical places that probably survived the flood, right? Higher mountains, so you can actually survive there. So I believe some of the people might have survived there, and there might actually be some ancient information. And we know that the Tibetans also described the giants and the Nephilim and all that stuff, just like the Bible did, right? So remember, the things that are not in question: the flood myths and the giants on Earth myth. Those things are widely shared around the world. True or not, I don't know, right? I believe them, but that doesn't mean I have proof other than the Bible, which says clearly these things happened. So there you go. All right, team. Peace.